Greetings, book lovers everywhere. I'm E-Train, and welcome to E-Train Talks. Here at E-Train Talks, I read, review, and discuss everything books in the hopes to inspire others to enjoy reading as much as I do. Today, I'm joined by Kaitlyn Johnson, a literary agent. Have you ever wondered how your favorite book ends up at your local library or bookstore? Well, it's all thanks to literary agents like my interviewee joining me today, Kaitlyn Johnson. What do they do that's so special? How do all the great books out there end up in the hands of readers? Well, today on the E-Train Talks podcast, we'll find out. Now, without further ado, please welcome Kaitlyn Johnson, a literary agent, graduate of Emerson College, and freelance editor, as we explore the world of books. Kaitlyn, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So, I think it's safe to say that being a literary agent, it's a tricky task. And let's face it, many people don't actually know what a literary agent actually does. Kaitlyn, will you please share the role of a literary agent and what educational background, training, or skills have helped you the most with your job?
Definitely. So I end up calling it basically like the middleman, or if you think about actors, how actors get their jobs, they need an agent to get them into the auditions. So writers need an agent to get them into the publishing house for their sort of audition. So I kind of feel like we're that middle person. But we also kind of play the role of editor, marketer, therapist sometimes. We have a lot of hats, but it's really about we're the person who helps you get your book to where it needs to be in front of editors. And then once it gets published, we're the ones who help you negotiate all of the stuff that goes with it. And for me, I interned before. I interned at a literary agency to see if I liked it, to see if I wanted to do it. And I took courses like copy editing in college and stuff like that because I knew I wanted to go into writing. I just didn't know the area. So I think for a lot of people, you don't have to technically have a degree. You don't have to have an English degree or anything like that. But for me, you look much more, I don't want to say safe, but plausible if you have some background in editing or reviews or internships in agenting, and you didn't just kind of wake up and say, I'm going to be an agent today and have no prior knowledge of what's going on.
So, did you have any other jobs in the book industry before becoming a literary agent?
I don't know. I wouldn't quite say it was the book industry, but I worked at Grub Street in Boston originally. And so I was working as their Muse intern because they have the conference Muse in the Marketplace every year, which I adore. A little biased, obviously, since I used to be part of the team. But I used to be the Muse intern. And then after that, I went up to being the Muse assistant and working in their developmental department. So Grub Street does writing classes and stuff like that for the everyday person and people in Boston. They do online courses for people who aren't in Boston. So I wouldn't say it's publishing industry, but it's adjacent. But aside from that, I'd only had internships. I hadn't had any other real publishing or literary agent adjacent jobs before then.
I'm not sure if you can answer this, but do you have any idea how word spreaded about a new book before social media and before the internet?
I really think it was just like ads in papers or something. I can't imagine it for one, obviously. Like it's such a different concept for us not to have it just at our fingertips. But I think, back in the day, it was really getting on radio shows when TV was having guest stars and stuff like that, where TV was an actual thing. Maybe getting guest spots on that, and then a lot of ads in papers. I feel like it was a lot harder.
So on average, how many manuscripts do you read a year, and what are some things that you look for when reading other authors' manuscripts for the first time?
So I don't have an actual number because I feel like, hush, sorry, my dog is, hi, dog in the lap. Okay. I don't have a certain manuscript number because it changes so often, but I'm actually cataloging this year all the stuff I read. So next year I'll have an answer for that because I was curious myself. But for what I look for when I'm reading a manuscript, I really look for the voice, that I can feel a character is 3D, fleshed out. I can kind of step into their shoes and it just matches, because there's a lot of the times where you can read something and you think the voice is either, you can tell the craft's not quite ready there, or they're writing with a YA voice rather than a middle grade voice. So for me, voice is huge. And I really like to start in the midst of some kind of scene, not looking back on memories or being explained things to, not kind of an after the fact thing. I hate those. I love being right in the middle of it. And it doesn't have to be, you know, like super action sequency explosions and fights and stuff like that. It can also be like really internal, which sometimes for me is even better because you get under the skin and it kind of unnerves you. So for me, that's a big first pages thing for me is voice, and obviously like clean pages, because I'm definitely a grammar nerd and a punctuation person. And so I won't hold it against you too bad, but I like to see it at least polished and, you know, readable.
This is kind of an extra question, but are there any authors that you recommend that do just what you want to see in a manuscript and a story?
Yeah, the thing about Jellyfish for middle grade is fantastic. Oh, so many books. Why did you do this to me? I will always talk Talk About Inkheart because it's one of my favorites when I was growing up, and I, you know, aged with it. That's one of my favorites because of the fantasy way of describing things. I think Cornelia Funk does a wonderful job of doing that, and also not giving you heavy exposition. She gives you just the right amount of exposition. So I definitely love that kind of stuff. Starfish and Young Adult also did a great job with putting you in the mindset and emotion.
Yeah, it's a great book. Do you only work with a particular book genre, or do you accept most books?
I accept a decent amount. I don't do like nonfiction, and I'm not great usually for like specific mystery suspense. Shush, dog. But I do take a lot of different like fantasy, romance, contemporary, looking at thriller now, graphic novels. So I definitely do that, but I don't do anything lower than middle grade. I don't do picture books. I don't do chapter books. He's not gonna be quiet if he's not in my lap. Okay. But yeah, so pretty wide gamut right now.
Well, that's great that you accept so many books, and it's also great that you have boundaries. Like, you can't accept every single book. So what are some of the most difficult challenges faced when negotiating deals with publishers or editors?
I think the hardest part is to be sure you are getting those changes for certain clauses that are going to hold the author back as they continue their career. So like clauses where it's a non-compete, meaning they can't publish this certain style or genre or something for a certain amount of time after publication date of this book. And so that can hold them up from publishing another book if it's in the same genre or the same age category. So we have to really fine tune that language in the contract to make sure it's not got loopholes where they can just be like, well, now you can't publish this for like 3 years. Haha. And it's also tricky in how you negotiate advances, because obviously we want everybody to be getting a fair deal and that they are getting paid fair. They're not getting paid low budget kind of aspects, but at the same time, you don't want to lose a deal for your client. So it is a lot of back and forth and a lot of patience, because I don't think a lot of people understand how long it takes contracts to happen. It can take months to even get in our email, and then it can take months to negotiate. So the patience, I think, is the key. The patience is like the hardest part, because I'm like, I just want us to sign this, but we have to take our time.
I can't imagine how patient you have to be. Like, I've seen that some authors, they do get their books, like, they're published, but they still have to wait like 2 years. I didn't know that you had to wait like months and months just for a contract, just to get into their email.
Yeah, it's such a waiting game. Publishing, you think querying's hard, and then you get published and you're like, oh my gosh, okay.
Did you always want to work in the book industry? And were there any specific events or people in your life that inspired you?
I wanted to be an editor originally. I wanted to sit in my cubicle and be nerdy and just edit books and not have to like worry about things. Because I've always, I mean, like most of us, I've always been the reader, reading while walking through school hallways, all that fun stuff. So I think when I was interning and I was working at Grubster at the same time, I started interacting more with authors. I started talking to them one-on-one, and I started talking to agents one-on-one, which I didn't know anything about the agenting world really. And I kind of noticed it was the best of both worlds. It kind of merged my interests. I got to be editor. I got to be brainstorming and figuring things out, but I also got to work with an author on what stories were coming out, what voices were going to be heard, how we could get these on the shelves. And I found that that was really, really fun. It's really stressful, but it's really fun at the same time. So I don't know that there was like, I know Grub Street definitely influenced me just because it was my first interaction with so many people from the literary industry that I got to see a lot more than I think the everyday person gets to see.
Well, it's great that you had a job so early and you discovered what you really wanted to do when you grew up. You wanted to be an agent, and it's great that you discovered that so soon. So can you give any advice to our listeners who may hope to one day be published authors or work in the book world?
Yeah, for published authors, it really needs to just be the book of your heart. Just write it, because trends are going to go by so quickly. What's popular today is not going to be popular when you finish your book in, months and months ahead of time. So write that book and then keep writing, because you don't know which one's going to be the one that grabs people. And then for being in the industry, I think it's just have faith, like endurance, I guess, because we all know the industry's not perfect, and we're actively trying to work on it. But I think the more people who stick it out and really plumb away, they're the ones who are really going to turn the wheel coming up. So I think that people hopefully aren't going to give up on those dreams because of how difficult it is to get into the industry. I do hope we have people kind of break through walls and get there. But I definitely suggest don't do shortcuts. No opening agencies when you haven't really interned or had any experience. None of that vanity press-esque stuff.
That's some great advice. And I should really use that, because I've had like 100 book ideas and I've only wrote like 2 chapters for each of them. So that's really good advice. And now it's time for the final question. The question I ask all of my guests. If you could be any character in any book, who would you be and why?
See, that's so hard because like so many of my books are dark. I'm like, do I really want this person's life? But I feel like it would be really cool to be Meggie from Inkheart, just because she is learning all of these things and meeting characters from books that she loves, which I feel like all of us would love to do that. And then she finds out she's one of the ones with the ability to bring these people out. So I feel like she would be a character I'd love to slip in the shoes of, just because, who doesn't want to spend the day with one of their favorite characters and just learn about them and what the world is behind the page? That would be just so cool.
So far, nearly everyone has chosen a Harry Potter character on my podcast. So it's a nice change of pace. So I've had such a great time learning about your fantastic and fascinating job. For me personally, learning the steps of how a book goes from a manuscript to published is so interesting, because I want to be an author when I grow up. So learning about the process is a great first step. Thanks so much for taking time out of your day to be interviewed.
Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
And to all of you listening, you can follow Kaitlyn Johnson on Twitter at RedPenKaitlyn. That's all, folks. Keep reading, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.